On our 50th wedding anniversary, my husband took his mistress to pick out a burial plot. Her name was Celeste Monroe, the woman he had never been able to forget. They posed for a photo on the cemetery lawn, standing in front of a headstone carved with a shared epitaph. The caption on the photo was identical on both their social media accounts. We couldn't share a bed in life, but we share a grave in death. I stared at the photo, my heart sinking. The words felt like a punch in the gut, a cruel reminder of how little I truly mattered. 50 years of marriage, and this was how we marked the milestone. My mind raced as I recalled the effort I had put into preparing our anniversary dinner. I had spent the entire day shopping, cooking, and carefully setting the table, hoping for a celebration that would honor our long years together. But as I stood there in the quiet of the kitchen, the weight of abandonment settled over me like a thick fog. Richard, my husband, wasn't here. Instead, he was with Celeste, living out a fantasy that had never really included me. The night I had dreamed of turned into a lonely reality. I glanced at the clock, realizing that the evening had come and gone, and not a single word from him. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. For years, I had buried my feelings, swallowed my disappointment, and convinced myself that things could get better. But now, I could see everything so clearly. The truth had been right in front of me, hidden behind years of excuses and unspoken words. I couldn't help but reflect on the time I had spent in this marriage, the sacrifices I had made, every meal I cooked, every moment I spent caring for him and our family, and all the while, Celeste's name had lingered in the background. She was his first love, the one he had never truly let go of, even after all these years. He had told me stories of her, stories that now seemed like little more than a veil for his lingering affection. And yet, here I was, alone, discarded like an afterthought, while they created memories together, memories that I would never be a part of. When I saw that photo, I wasn't just hurt. I felt betrayed, shattered by the realization that I had spent 5 decades living for someone else, only to watch him make his final choice. I had hoped, foolishly, that our anniversary would be a reminder of the love we had once shared. But instead, I was left to clean up the remnants of a celebration that was never meant to be. As I threw away the meal I had worked so hard to prepare, the bitterness of the moment filled my chest. Richard had always been a man of words, lecturing me on everything from household finances to the smallest decisions. Yet he never truly saw me, never really listened. Now, as the remnants of our life together settled into the trash, I realized that this was it. I had reached my breaking point. The door opened suddenly. Richard had returned, his awkward stance betraying his discomfort. He saw the table, the untouched food, the trash bag filled with everything I had poured my heart into, and with that, the familiar, condescending tone of his voice rang out, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. "You made all this just for yourself?" he asked, the cold judgment in his eyes cutting through me like a knife. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The weight of silence between us was unbearable. Richard's words echoed in my mind as I watched him standing there, cold and judgmental, his eyes scanning the remnants of the anniversary dinner I had so carefully prepared. For a moment, I almost felt like I was back in the years when I used to justify his behavior, when I would excuse his indifference as just a flaw I could endure for the sake of the family. But not anymore. Not today. Living such a wasteful life, he had said, his voice dripping with disdain. How many times had I heard that tone, the same cold, scolding tone he used for as long as I could remember, The same tone that had made me feel small, insignificant, as though nothing I did could ever be good enough. It had been like this for years. The house was always clean, the meals always prepared, but it was never enough. It never mattered that I had given my all. It never mattered that I had put everything into making sure his life, and by extension, our life together, was comfortable. "You made all this just for yourself," he repeated, his eyes narrowing as though he couldn't understand why I had chosen to throw the food away. As though I owed him an explanation for what I did with the food I had prepared for a family that wasn't even there. I felt my chest tighten, the sting of his words too sharp, too familiar. A part of me wanted to lash out, to tell him what I had been holding in for so long. But there was no point in trying to explain anymore. There were no words left to say that would make him see what I had been through. He didn't want to see. He had never truly wanted to see. He had always been more concerned with his own comfort, with keeping up appearances, than with the woman who had stood by his side for half a century. "I'm sorry," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm done pretending." His expression shifted from disdain to confusion, and that confused look only fueled the fire burning inside me. For years, I had swallowed my hurt, my frustration, because I thought I had to, for the sake of our family, for the sake of appearances. But today, everything was different. The years of silence, the years of putting him and everyone else first, had caught up with me. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just done with him. I was done with everything done, with living in the shadow of a man who had never seen me. "I don't owe you an explanation anymore," I continued, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly. "I cooked for this family. I've cooked for this family for 50 years. And what do I get in return? A photo of you and Celeste standing in front of a grave, posting it on social media like it's something to be proud of." His eyes flinched at the mention of Celeste's name, but I didn't care, not anymore. The truth had to be said. The lies, the deception, the constant juggling between the woman he had loved all those years ago and the wife he had simply settled for it had all come crashing down. I had tried for too long to fit into a role that wasn't meant for me, to be the dutiful wife in a marriage that was built on pretense, not love. "You don't get to lecture me anymore, Richard," I said, each word falling with deliberate weight. "You don't get to make me feel like I'm the one who's wrong, like I'm the one who needs to reflect. You don't get to tell me how to live my life when you've been living a lie for decades." For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or perhaps it was fear. I didn't know. And at that moment, I didn't care. The man who had once been my partner, my confidant, was nothing more than a stranger now. The man who had held my hand on our wedding day, who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, had turned into someone unrecognizable. His life, his love, had always been about Celeste, and I had just been the woman who kept the house in order, while he chased a dream that wasn't mine to hold. "You don't get to use me as your scapegoat anymore." I continued, my words clear, each one cutting through the tension that had built up over the years. "You've made your choices, and now it's my turn to make mine." His face reddened with anger, his hands shaking at his sides. "You're throwing a tantrum, Evelyn. We're talking about a burial plot, not your childish need for attention. You're being petty." I shook my head. "No, Richard, this isn't about a burial plot. It's about 50 years of my life that I will never get back. 50 years of waiting, of sacrificing, of pretending that everything was fine when I knew you were never really here with me. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. The air between us was thick with years of unresolved tension, years of unspoken resentments that had been buried deep inside me. I was tired of pretending, tired of hoping for something that would never come. I'm done, I said, my voice calm but firm. This marriage is over. I'm done living for you, done living for everyone else. I'm going to live for myself now. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me as though the woman standing in front of him was someone he no longer recognized. And maybe that was true. Maybe he had never really known me at all. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of years of sacrifice lift off my shoulders. There would be no more playing the role of the devoted wife, no more hiding my feelings to protect his pride. It was my turn now, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. Richard didn't say a word as he turned and walked out of the kitchen. The door slammed behind him, and I was left standing there, alone. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. I felt free. The silence in the house felt suffocating as days passed with Richard's absence. I had never felt more alone. He didn't come back after that night, not even to pick up his belongings, which I had neatly packed and left by the door. It seemed he was too caught up in his new life with Celeste to even spare a thought for the woman who had stood by him for 50 years. I didn't expect him to come back, and yet there was a strange, twisted part of me that held onto the hope he might, as though I were still somehow waiting for a miracle that would never come. During those days of silence, I couldn't escape the feeling of being invisible. Even though Richard and I had been married for decades, there had always been a distance between us, a distance I had ignored, or tried to ignore, for far too long. But now, it became painfully clear that all those years of sacrifice had amounted to nothing. I wasn't part of his world anymore. I hadn't been for years. And yet, it took me this long to realize it. There was another person who had always been on the periphery of our relationship, Julian, our son. I had raised him, given my all to make sure he had a good life, a stable life, and yet he never seemed to fully understand me, never fully grasped what I had given up for him and his father. I had expected him to be a source of comfort, but instead, his words cut deeper than anything Richard had ever said. When Julian came over, bringing his wife Margot and little Leo with him, it felt like more of an intervention than a visit. I knew they were concerned about the divorce, but their concern felt so shallow, so self-serving. Julian started talking, his voice laced with impatience. "Mom, I honestly don't get what you're doing. Dad and Celeste haven't done anything inappropriate. They're just old friends. Do you have to make such a big deal out of this? Can't you be more mature?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. Did he really think I was being petty, that this was just about an old man's friendship with someone from his past? Didn't he see the years of emotional neglect, the betrayal that had been unfolding in front of my eyes for decades? My marriage wasn't a simple disagreement. It was a life where I had been ignored, replaced, and discarded. And now, here he was, telling me to just tolerate it. And don't forget, Julian continued, if it weren't for Celeste stepping aside back then, you wouldn't have married Dad in the first place. She gave you this life. You should be grateful. You've been fine all these years, and now you want to divorce over a grave plot. That's ridiculous. My heart twisted in my chest. Grateful for what? For the life I had been forced to accept, for the years of loneliness, for being the second choice. Did he really think that? Because I had stayed? because I had kept quiet for his sake. It meant I should never be allowed to live for myself. I had spent my whole life sacrificing, living in the shadows of their expectations, and now, when I finally found the courage to stand up for myself, he was telling me I was wrong. I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw how little he truly understood. You don't get it, do you? Julian, this isn't about a grave plot or about Celeste. It's about 50 years of my life that I'll never get back. 50 years of hoping things would change, of trying to make this marriage work, of putting your father and this family first. And now, I'm supposed to just accept that I've been invisible all this time. His expression shifted, a flicker of guilt flashing across his face before he masked it with frustration. Mom, I just think you're overreacting. It's not that big of a deal. My voice became firmer, and I felt my words cut through the air like a knife. No, Julian, it is a big deal. It's a big deal because I'm not just your mother. I'm a person who has spent her entire life living for others. And now, for the first time, I'm choosing to live for myself. I'm not going to keep putting everyone else's needs before mine. He stood there, stunned, unable to comprehend the depth of my pain. But I wasn't going to wait for him to understand. I wasn't going to let him guilt trip me into staying silent again. Not anymore. I thought about the years I had spent trapped in this marriage, the years of emotional labor I had put into keeping it together, and how little it had meant in the end. Richard had never really seen me. And now, neither had Julian. They saw a mother, a wife, roles I had been playing for so long, but they didn't see the woman behind those roles, the woman who had dreams, who had hopes, who deserved to live freely. I didn't want to be just the background to their lives anymore. I didn't want to be the one who stayed silent while they lived their lives. I had spent too long being the person who held everything together, while they lived in their own worlds, selfishly chasing their desires. Now, it was my turn. I've spent my whole life making sacrifices for this family, Julian, but now I'm done. I'm done living for you, done living for your father. I'm living for me now. His face hardened, and I saw the anger rise within him, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of his disappointment, of his judgment. This time, I was standing my ground. Julian opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. No more. This is my life, and I'm going to live it the way I see fit. And if that means leaving everything behind, then so be it. His words couldn't touch me anymore. For the first time, I felt the weight of years of sacrifice lift off my shoulders, and it felt like freedom. Days passed, and I spent my time lost in thought, reflecting on the years I had dedicated to Richard, to our family, and to a life that never truly felt mine. It was strange after decades of living in the background, always catering to others. I had suddenly found myself in a place of stillness, a place where I had to confront the choices I had made. The silence left by Richard's absence was deafening, yet it felt like a blessing. No more pretending, no more playing the role of the dutiful wife while he lived a life with Celeste in the open. But what hurt most was that I wasn't alone in my suffering. Julian, my son, whom I had sacrificed so much for, seemed to be the very embodiment of everything I had tried to shield from, when he came by, bringing Margot and little Leo along. I sensed a shift. It wasn't just a visit. It felt more like an intervention, one where I was expected to explain myself, to justify my decision to pursue a divorce after 50 years of marriage. Mom, he started, his tone laced with impatience. I don't get what you're doing. Dad and Celeste haven't done anything wrong. They're just old friends. Why are you making this such a big deal? You've got to be more mature about this. You should be grateful for what you have." His words hit me like a slap in the face. Did he not understand the depth of the hurt I had carried for all these years? How could he not see that this wasn't just about Celeste or some old friendship? It was about the years of my life I had spent in a marriage that was never truly mine. It was about the sacrifices I had made and the painful truth that Richard had never once been fully present with me. Mom, if it weren't for Celeste stepping aside all those years ago, you wouldn't even be married to Dad in the first place. Julian continued, his voice growing more condescending. She gave you this life. You should be grateful. All these years, you've been fine, so why throw it all away over a burial plot? I stared at him, feeling the anger and sadness swell inside me. Grateful for the years I spent watching my husband's heart belong to someone else. Grateful for a life where I was nothing more than a footnote, a placeholder in a story that always belonged to someone else. His words were an insult to everything I had endured. And yet, here he was, asking me to tolerate it just a little longer. I'm not throwing anything away. Julian, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm choosing to live the rest of my life for myself. I spent 50 years trying to make things work, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, but in the end, it wasn't enough. And now, I'm done. I'm done living for someone else. He looked at me as though I had just spoken in a foreign language, as if he couldn't comprehend what I was saying. His face contorted with frustration, but I didn't back down. I had given everything to this family, and now, for the first time, I was choosing to give something to myself. I've spent my whole life putting everyone else's needs before mine. Julian, your father, you, Leo, everyone but myself. And now it's my turn. It's my turn to live for me. I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for the sake of a family that's never really seen me. You don't get to tell me what's right anymore. This isn't just about a grave plot or some symbolic gesture. It's about the years I've lost and the woman I've forgotten to be. Julian opened his mouth to respond, but I could see the words falter in his throat. For the first time, he didn't have an argument. Instead, he just stared at me, his expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. And I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I finally stopped waiting for their approval, stopped living under their expectations. I've done my part. I continued. Now, I'm going to live the rest of my life for me. Whether you understand it or not, that's the choice I'm making. And with that, I felt the burden of years of quiet suffering begin to lift, just a little. Julian might not understand, but I no longer needed his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. This was my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was choosing to live it on my terms. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at the crossroads of a life I had lived for so long, and a new path I was finally ready to walk. Richard remained absent. Caught up in his world with Celeste, he didn't come home, didn't attempt to make amends, and certainly didn't consider that the woman he had spent 50 years with might deserve more than just silence. It felt strange, like I was both the villain and the victim in a story I had never fully chosen. I had spent so many years ignoring the whispers, the doubts, and now I was finally facing the truth. I had been invisible, taken for granted, and worse, disrespected. But then came Julian's visit, his face as strained as ever, as though he were performing an act rather than speaking from the heart. When he arrived, it was with Margot and little Leo in tow, almost as if they were playing the role of the family unit. Julian's voice was already laced with impatience as he launched into a lecture, as though I were the one who had made a mistake. "Mom, I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. Dad and Celeste haven't done anything wrong. They're just old friends." I felt a tightness in my chest. Was he really going to defend this? Hadn't he seen what had been happening all these years? What did he think this was about? Did he think I was overreacting? He continued, his tone condescending. "If it weren't for Celeste stepping aside all those years ago, you wouldn't even have married Dad. She gave you this life. You should be grateful. You've been fine all these years. So why throw everything away over something like a grave plot gratitude?" That word echoed in my mind, and it felt like a punch. Gratitude for what? For the years of living in the shadows of his first love, for the constant feeling of being second best, for the silent loneliness I had endured for decades. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Grateful, I echoed, my voice trembling with the weight of unspoken truths. Grateful for the years I've spent pretending that everything was okay, when in reality, I've been living in a marriage where your father's heart was never truly mine. Grateful for the sacrifices I've made while he's out there, living a life with Celeste, a life that should have been mine to share with him. I looked at Julian, searching his face for understanding, but there was nothing, no recognition of the pain that had been simmering beneath the surface all these years. His eyes were cold, distant, as if I were the one who had lost touch with reality. "This isn't about a grave plot, Julian," I continued, my voice steady but firm. "This is about 50 years of my life, 50 years of sacrificing, of putting everyone else first, your father, you, our family, and in the end, it hasn't mattered. I've lost so much for the sake of others, and now it's time for me to live for myself." His expression faltered for a second, but he quickly masked it with frustration. "Mom, this is just about closure. It's not that big of a deal. Can't you just be the bigger person?" The words stung, but they also opened my eyes to something else. He didn't get it. He didn't understand what it was like to live in the background of his father's life, to quietly watch as Celeste always came first. He had no idea what it meant to be the one who was always overlooked, always the one who had to keep everything together while everyone else lived their lives. "I've spent my whole life being the bigger person, Julian," I replied, my voice growing sharper. "I've spent 50 years waiting for something that was never going to come. No more. I'm done pretending. This is my life. And for once, I'm going to live it for me." Julian stood there, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't know how to respond. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Maybe he realized that I was no longer the woman who would silently endure. Maybe he realized that, for once, I was going to stand up for myself, no matter what it cost me. "I don't owe anyone any more sacrifices," I said, my voice calm and final. "Not your father, not you. I've lived for everyone else for too long. Now it's my turn." For a long moment, Julian didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me like he had never seen me before. But I didn't care. I had said what needed to be said. I had taken the first step toward living for myself, and nothing he said or did could take that away from me. The days stretched on, and I was left in the quiet aftermath of my decision. Richard hadn't come back, and Julian, with his constant disappointment, hadn't understood either. The weight of the silence in the house wasn't as suffocating anymore. There was a strange sense of freedom that came with finally saying what I had been holding inside for so long. But it wasn't just about the divorce. Not really. It was about everything I had endured, about finally taking control of my life after so many years of being unseen. I had spent half a century living for others, Richard, Julian, even Celeste, in a way. But now, as I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the empty space of the house that had once been filled with laughter and promises, I realized how much of my life had been given away. It was strange to think that for all those years, I had lived in the hope that things would change, that somehow Richard would see me for who I truly was. But instead, he had always been caught in the past, in the memory of a love that never really let go, and I had been the one to bear the brunt of it all. Even now, as I thought about the years of emotional neglect, there was no anger left in me, only a deep, hollow ache that I had carried for so long, an ache that was finally starting to fade. Richard had been my everything, and yet I had never been enough. He had been too busy chasing a ghost to ever notice the woman right in front of him, and when I finally found the strength to walk away, it was like the last thread that connected me to him snapped, leaving me free to live my own life, one that didn't have to revolve around his needs, his expectations, or his indifference. The quiet in the house grew more comfortable as I filled the days with small, purposeful activities. I started making time for myself, taking long walks, reading books I had always wanted to read, but never had the time for. And slowly, I began to reclaim the pieces of myself that had been lost over the years. I found joy in small things, things that had always been there, but that I had never fully appreciated before. It was the feeling of the warm sun on my skin, the scent of fresh flowers blooming in the garden, the sound of birds singing in the early morning hours. These were the things I had pushed aside, but now they felt like gifts I had been too busy to receive. But even in the midst of my newfound freedom, I couldn't help but feel the sting of betrayal, the weight of everything I had given up, and how little any of it had mattered. It was as though all my sacrifices had been invisible, unnoticed, unappreciated. It was hard not to feel the bitterness rise when I saw the way Richard and Celeste continued their lives without a care in the world. Their photos together, their social media posts about their eternal love, it all felt like a slap in the face. How had I allowed myself to be swept aside so easily, and why had I spent so many years pretending that I could be content with the crumbs they offered me? It was during one of these moments of reflection that Sylvie, the young woman who had become a surprising source of comfort, reached out to me again. Sylvie was the one who had helped me with the divorce papers, the one who had listened when I felt like no one else would. She had been a constant presence, a gentle reminder that it was never too late to change, to live a life that was truly my own. And now, as I worked through my healing, Sylvie became more than just a friend. She became my guide, my partner in rediscovery. She introduced me to pottery, to the simple, meditative act of shaping clay. It wasn't something I had ever imagined myself doing, but the first time my hands touched the smooth, cool surface of the clay, something inside me shifted. There was something incredibly grounding about it, something that made me feel connected to the present in a way I had never experienced before. It was as though the act of creating, of molding something with my own hands, was healing a part of me that had been broken for so long. Sylvie encouraged me to embrace the process, to take my time, to enjoy the journey without worrying about the outcome. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living. I wasn't just existing in the shadow of others. I was finally creating my own story, one that wasn't defined by the choices or expectations of those around me. It was mine, and it felt like a beautiful, quiet rebellion against the years of compromise and sacrifice. With each piece of pottery I made, I felt myself becoming more whole, more myself. I wasn't just learning a new skill. I was rediscovering who I was, what I was capable of, and what truly brought me peace. It was an experience that had nothing to do with Richard, with Celeste, or with Julian. It was about me, and that was enough. I couldn't change the past, but I could change the way I moved forward. And in this small act of creation, in the quiet moments spent at the pottery wheel, I found the strength to rebuild myself. There was no going back. The woman who had been overlooked, who had been taken for granted, was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to live for herself. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly free. The quietness in the house had become a strange kind of comfort. As the days passed since Richard left, I found myself slowly rediscovering pieces of who I was, pieces I had buried under the weight of years of sacrifice. The house felt different now, emptier, yes, but also more spacious, as if there was room for something new, something that hadn't been there before. It was a difficult thing to articulate, but I could feel the shift within me. For the first time in years, I was living for myself. But even as I embraced this newfound freedom, there were still moments when the weight of the years caught up with me. It wasn't just the abandonment by Richard that stung. It was the realization that I had allowed it to happen for so long. The long stretches of silence, the loneliness that was always lurking beneath the surface, and the nagging feeling that I had been invisible all these years. Even in my own home, Richard had always been physically there, but emotionally, he had long ago checked out, and for so many years, I had convinced myself that things would get better, that if I just kept going, kept being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, things would eventually shift, but they never did. And then there was Julian, my own son, the child I had raised with my own hands, who now seemed so distant. It broke my heart to realize that he didn't understand what I was going through. Instead of offering support, he seemed to be caught up in his own version of the family drama. When he came by, bringing Margot and little Leah with him, I could see the familiar impatience in his eyes as he spoke. It was the same tone he had used ever since he was old enough to understand the world, impatient, dismissive, as if I were the one making all of this difficult. "Mom," Julian started, his voice sharp, "I don't get why you're making such a big deal out of this. Dad and Celeste, they're just old friends. You don't need to get so upset about it." I wanted to scream, to tell him how deeply his words cut, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at him and felt a deep sadness wash over me. He didn't get it, not really. He didn't understand what it was like to be invisible in your own marriage, to have your entire life built around someone who was never truly present. He didn't know the pain of always being second place, of always being overlooked. He continued, oblivious to my growing frustration. "Honestly, you should be grateful. If it weren't for Celeste stepping aside years ago, you wouldn't have married Dad in the first place. She gave you this life. You've been fine all these years, so why are you throwing everything away now?" The words hit me harder than I expected. Grateful for what? For the years I had spent waiting for Richard to love me the way he loved her. Grateful for a life built on compromise, on sacrifices made for the sake of family, while my own needs went unaddressed. His words were like a slap in the face, but I remained calm. You think I'm throwing everything away over a grave plot? I asked, my voice steady. It's not about the plot, Julian. It's about 50 years of my life, of giving everything I had to this family, to a marriage that was never truly mine. It's about living a life where I was constantly second place, where my heart and soul were always taken for granted. He looked at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. It was clear he didn't understand. How could he? He had never been the one to silently endure, to silently suffer, just to keep a family together. He had never known what it was like to be the one who gave up everything for others. I'm not throwing it away. Julian, I continued, my voice firm. I'm finally choosing to live for myself for the first time. I'm choosing to stop being invisible, to stop living for someone else's expectations. I've given enough. It's my time now. His expression shifted uncertainty, frustration, confusion all played across his face as he processed my words. But he didn't argue. Instead, he stood there, silent, as if for once he didn't know what to say. I let out a deep breath, a release that felt like years of pent-up emotion. The woman who had lived for Richard, for Julian, for everyone else was no longer here, and in her place was someone who understood her worth. I had spent too many years sacrificing my happiness, my dreams, and my peace for others, and I was done. Maybe you don't understand now, I said softly, but this is my decision, and I'm finally living for me. Julian stood still for a moment longer, then nodded, though not in understanding, but in resignation. He didn't have to understand. What mattered now was that I had finally chosen to live on my own terms, without apologies, without regret, and that, in itself, was a victory. The days following my decision to leave Richard were filled with quiet reflection, but also with a new sense of purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for someone else. I wasn't trying to keep a marriage together that had been broken for years. Instead, I was beginning to live for myself, something that felt both liberating and terrifying in equal measure. But even in my newfound sense of freedom, I couldn't ignore the crushing weight of betrayal. Richard's relationship with Celeste had always been an open secret, one I had tried to turn a blind eye to for decades. And now, as I stood in the ruins of my marriage, I realized how much of my life had been shaped by their unspoken bond. It wasn't just about their past. Either it was about the years I had spent fighting for a love that was never fully mine. His words, his cold indifference, the way he had moved on while I stood still, it all hit me like a wave I had no choice but to ride. I had thought that my departure would bring a sense of relief, but it was complicated. There was the matter of my son, Julian. He was a grown man, but the distance between us had always been there. And now, with the weight of the divorce hanging in the air, the distance felt even more profound. When he came to visit, bringing his wife, Margot, and their young son, Leo, it was clear that this wasn't a simple family gathering. It was as if he had come to intervene, to play the role of mediator in a story he didn't fully understand. "Mom," Julian began, his tone exasperated, "I don't get what you're doing. Dad and Celeste, they haven't done anything wrong. They're just old friends. You don't need to make this such a big deal." I felt my chest tighten. How could he not understand? How could he not see the years of silent suffering? The countless moments where I had been invisible in my own home. I had given everything to this family, sacrificed my own happiness, my own identity, and yet Here he was, defending his father, defending Celeste. The sting of his words hit me harder than I expected. "Why are you making such a big deal about this?" Julian continued, his voice filled with impatience. "If it weren't for Celeste stepping aside all those years ago, you wouldn't even have married Dad in the first place. She gave you this life. You should be grateful. Grateful." The word reverberated in my mind. How could I be grateful for a life where I was constantly second place, where my love and devotion were never enough? How could I be grateful for a marriage where I had been asked to ignore the painful reality of Richard's love for Celeste, his first love? My heart clenched as I looked at Julian, seeing the same self-centered perspective that had defined so much of our relationship over the years. "I'm not grateful, Julian," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not grateful for a life where I had to sacrifice everything, my dreams, my happiness, my identity, just to be the dutiful wife. I've spent 50 years being the good wife, the good mother, the one who held everything together. And for what? To be discarded when you and your father find something more exciting. I'm done with that." His face tightened with frustration, but I didn't back down. I had spent far too long keeping my emotions bottled up, living for others, and I wasn't going to let him make me feel guilty for choosing to live for myself now. "This isn't about Celeste. Julian," I said, my voice steady, "this is about 50 years of my life, 50 years of waiting for something to change, of putting everyone else first. I've given enough. I'm choosing to live for me now." There was a long silence between us. Julian looked at me as though he had never seen me before. It was as though the weight of my words had finally reached him, even if he didn't understand them. For the first time, I wasn't asking for his approval. I wasn't waiting for him to validate my decision. This was my life, and I had every right to live it on my own terms. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just stood there, watching me. I could see the confusion in his eyes, but it no longer mattered. The truth was that I had spent far too long living in the shadows of others' expectations, and now I was stepping into the light. I've spent too many years of my life pretending. Julian. I continued, my voice softer now. I've sacrificed so much for this family, for your father, for you, but I can't do it anymore. I'm done pretending that everything is fine when it's not. This is my life, and I'm going to live it for me, even if you don't understand." He stood there, his jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. The moment hung between us, a fragile silence that spoke volumes. Finally, Julian turned away, his frustration clear, but I knew there was nothing left to say. I had made my choice. And for the first time in decades, I felt like I was finally living for myself. As the days passed, the void left by Richard's absence began to settle within me. But it wasn't as painful as I had imagined. There was a strange comfort in the emptiness, a peace that came from knowing I had finally broken free. I spent my time finding new routines, doing things I had neglected for years, things that had once been mine, but had been pushed aside in the wake of years of family obligations and sacrifices. Cooking for myself, something as simple as enjoying a meal without pretending everything was fine, felt like an act of self-love. For the first time in decades, I wasn't preparing a feast for someone who couldn't be bothered to notice, but even as I found my footing in this new life, I knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. The hardest part, I realized, wasn't Richard's departure or the loss of our marriage. It was the judgment from others. People couldn't understand why I was walking away from a 50-year marriage, why I had made the decision to divorce when, by all accounts, I should have been content in my old age, having lived a full life. It was as if society expected me to just endure, to keep suffering quietly for the sake of family and reputation. And it was in this silence, in this societal pressure to stay in my place, that I found the real challenge. It wasn't just Richard who had failed me. It was the entire world, it seemed, that had dismissed my feelings and expectations. Even Julian, my own son, didn't understand. He came over a few days after I had filed the divorce papers, and from the moment he stepped through the door, it was clear that this was no ordinary visit. His face, usually so impatient and dismissive, was etched with concern. But there was something else there, too, disappointment. "Mom, why are you doing this?" he asked before even saying hello. "Dad hasn't done anything wrong." "It's not like he's cheating. He's just trying to make peace with his past. Why can't you just be more understanding?" The words cut deeper than I expected. Understanding. I thought, how could I ever understand a man who had neglected me for years in favor of his first love? How could I understand a man who had slowly eroded the love we once shared with every dismissive glance, every careless word, every time he chose Celeste over me? The injustice of it all washed over me, and for the first time in years, I wasn't holding back my thoughts. Understanding, I repeated, my voice growing firmer. I've been understanding for 50 years. I've spent decades making excuses for Richard, for his behavior, for his relationship with Celeste. I put aside my own dreams, my own needs, and what did I get in return? A marriage where I was invisible, where my sacrifices didn't matter. Julian looked at me, eyes wide, as if he couldn't fathom what I was saying. The truth was hard for him to hear, but I was past caring. I had lived my whole life trying to keep the peace, trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. Now, I had no intention of keeping up the act any longer. "This isn't about Richard's past, Julian," I continued, my voice steady. "This is about the years I've spent trying to make a life with someone who was never really there. I've spent 50 years of my life making excuses, being understanding, always putting everyone else first. But I can't do it anymore. I'm not going to keep sacrificing my own happiness just so everyone else can feel comfortable." He stood there, stunned into silence. For a moment, I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it quickly turned into frustration. "Mom, you're overreacting. You're just being dramatic. You don't have to make a big deal out of this. Everyone's fine." I felt a rush of heat rise in my chest. How could he say that he didn't know what it was like to live in the shadows of his father's love, to be the one who always had to carry the weight of the family? He hadn't seen how many times I had held everything together while Richard followed his own desires, while he followed Celeste. He hadn't seen the tears I wiped away in private, the days I spent pretending that everything was fine when inside I was slowly dying. "No," I said sharply, "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being honest, and I'm done being silent. I've spent too many years being the good wife, the good mother, the one who keeps everything running smoothly while everyone else gets to live their own lives. Well, not anymore. This is my life, and I'm going to live it for me. Whether you understand it or not, I'm done being the one who holds everything together for everyone else. I'm done being invisible." Julian opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't wait for him to speak. I had already said everything I needed to. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for his approval. I wasn't asking for anyone's approval. This was my time now, and I was going to take it. The silence between us stretched, but I no longer felt that familiar weight of expectation. For once, I wasn't living for someone else. I was finally living for myself. And though Julian didn't understand, though he might never understand, I knew one thing for sure: I was free. For years, I had lived under the weight of expectations from Richard, from Julian, from everyone around me. I had been the perfect wife, the perfect mother, always putting others first. But when I finally decided to live for myself, to take control of my life after 50 years of sacrifice, I was met with disbelief, judgment, and criticism. Yet, in that moment, I found a strength I never knew I had. I realized that sometimes, in order to truly live, we have to stop living for others' approval and start living for ourselves. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Never lose sight of your own worth. No matter how much you give, no matter how much you sacrifice, remember that your happiness and well-being matter too. It's never too late to reclaim your life, to choose your happiness, and to walk away from situations or relationships that no longer serve you. Don't let fear or guilt hold you back. The most important thing is to live authentically, to be true to yourself, and to trust that your choices will lead you to the life you deserve. If this resonates with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever made a life-changing decision for yourself? What did it take for you to finally choose your own happiness? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories and life lessons. You deserve to live a life that brings you joy and fulfillment. Let's support each other on this journey.